All keyboard.
Yeah, no kidding.
My kids ask me to do my stuff.
Well, how old are they?
1 and 5.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, are you? You know what? When we had that meeting, I was sick. I was getting sick. I was so out of it. Yeah. Next day, I said, hey, Wednesday I came into work, my boss took one with me and she said, go home. I have so much to do. She said, go home for 3 days. So she sent me home before noon. Yeah. So, yeah. It was just a bad week. My mom had a surgical procedure on Friday.
We just needed a back.
Oh,
is she okay?
Yeah, she's waiting for a biopsy.
This is our, oh, can you get all 3 chairs in that picture?
I'm gonna be panning anyways.
Good. Do you want to move them forward and put that behind? No, you're good?
Because, look, sit down right there.
You could have brought mics.
Yeah. Can we point them down?
Yeah. Or she gets some from somewhere else. I know. I said the same thing. I was like, wow, how low light.
Yeah.
Down. So we're hitting
It might be hot.
There's 4 viewers right now.
There's what? That's why we already got people viewing. How's that? Send me the
Would you sit down here?
Hey, Julie.
Can one of those points at that?
Yeah, and Bob can one show down this over here.
What about the second one? Yeah, the second one at Denise.
I think we should put like a glamour shot kind of thing.
That's good.
Everyone should have a bow
It's
and
better.
a cowboy. I don't see why that went out of style. That was unfortunate.
Is that good? Hey, can we see Julie?
Well,
Yep.
no, I have a position for you.
And if we move these closer, maybe?
How's that? It's good. It's better than 4.
Okay, you don't have that. You don't have that. I'm good. Okay. But this is great. This is great. You want to stay up there? Okay. All right.
That's so naked without a camera.
Jimmy over there.
Today, actually, it's all blurred. This is
Hi.
How do you do? Yeah, between the two of us. All in favor? Oh, this is especially
Sorry.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
I think it's a library. Yes, so
Yes, I
You know, something interesting happened to me yesterday. My brother, and he went on a call, and the guy noticed his last name on the ticket.
Yeah.
I just never met her.
I was hoping we could do most of that.
She left for real living.
Yeah, he's getting a real high quality. Do you want,
Testing.
it's kind of hard because, yeah, it's really loud.
Hello. Testing.
See everybody's.
We heard your.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's an awful lot of people talking in the background right now.
I know.
Hopefully they'll be quiet. I don't Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just going to do if everyone can be quiet for just 1 second so we can check sound. Hello. Just testing sound there. We see we already have some people tuned in. We're just testing the sound. If those who are supposed to be providing feedback, please do at whether this sound level works. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Chat.
Okay. He says, okay, good.
It's 7 now.
All right.
Right.
I'm standing here without it. I figured I would just annoy
Better together.
And then, I mean, then we're all good, but then someone else is doing it.
I know. Well, no.
But they were very early. They also were like.
Right, they're also small. How are you?
Right.
I love when someone takes the part to feed you.
They opened a hotel in Chicago. It's very good. It's very good. So I was thinking the same here. Checking out my competition. That's it.
I was like, who grabbed it? Who was it?
I feel like I'm walking in the room.
He does. He really does. It's impressive. He's probably better than
Yeah, he's back.
So, Denise, who's giving the keynote starting precisely.
Yeah, I think we should. She wanted it.
The secret.
It's gonna be 11.
It's gonna be what?
11 right now.
I have 5 till, no, it's 11. What do you have, Bob?
It's 10:59.
Okay, we're almost ready then. All right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I had started that project and then I was like,
Yes, your first.
because I have a game that I love.
Tell me when to start.
Yes, I think we're gonna go at like repeating something. Yeah, is everybody comfortable? We're ready to start.
No, not at all.
So I think we're set. It's almost 11 o'clock, and at 11 o'clock we'll start streaming. And does that mean that I'm already talking? So that means that we're streaming. Hello out there. This is a totally rehearsed event. We practiced it for weeks, as everyone can see. My name is Bob Doyle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Library Association. And for all of you who are here today, we're very happy that you're here and welcome you to our offices. And for those that are somewhere else out in internet land, I guess, we welcome you to this event. On behalf of the Illinois Library community and the 3,000 members of the Illinois Library Association, I'd like to welcome you to this soon-to-be famous event. As many of the people in this room know, and maybe some of the people that we're streaming out there will know that this is the second annual event of this kind. And last year, hope this doesn't confuse everyone, last year, Joanne, who is in the room right now, received it for this book called The Things We Save. And today there are 3 potential people that are candidates for this year. Before we get into that, I thought I would just mention that the Illinois Library Association is a membership organization, and we're committed to providing opportunities for Illinois libraries and, maybe more importantly, the people that they serve to reach their fullest potential. This project started with a group of ILA members about 2 years ago. They took a germ of an idea for libraries to become more involved in content management and creation, and have turned it into a model that has received national attention. We're pleased that all 3 of the Illinois library systems, as well as the American Library Association, the Public Library Association, have joined as partners in sponsoring and promoting the event. And we look forward to hearing and seeing how this year's finalists and winner today will appear in the various publications, the websites, and the programs and events throughout the year. Those are my very kind of brief remarks. The current president of the Illinois Library Association is here, Jeannie, and I'm sure she would welcome the opportunity to say hello to all that are here and elsewhere. So, Jeannie.
Okay. Yes, I'm Jeannie Dilger. I'm the current director of the LaGrange Public Library and the president of the Illinois Library Association, as Bob said. And I just wanted a moment to echo some of Bob's words, thanking everybody for coming today. I was one of the people that was in the audience, one of many people that was in the audience less than 2 years ago at the American Library Association conference when David Benjamin planted this seed. And again, that was just the term I had in my mind. Bob said the germ of an idea, just planted this seed in the audience's mind. And it's been so amazing to see the committee form almost immediately, get together, and within a year they had selected the first winner. Here we are at the second go round. I just want to thank all the committee members for all of the impressive work that they've done over the past 2 years. I happen to know they're writing a book on how to replicate this in your own state or community. So I'm just really proud of all of them, and I think we should give them all a round of applause. So with that, I will turn it over to Dee Brennan, the Executive Director of Reaching Across the Illinois Library System.
Thank you, Jeannie. Hi, everyone here and everywhere out there. I am Dee Brennan. I'm the Director of RAILS, Reaching Across Illinois Library System. We have, along with ILA and the other partners, been involved in this project from the very beginning. And the reason that we got involved and the reason that we're excited about it, just as Bob and Jeannie have spoken about, is because RAILS is in business to help libraries to serve their communities better. That's what we do. And this project provides more content for readers. It provides more access. It helps authors. And it helps readers, obviously. So we've been very delighted to be part of it. I think it's also has proven to be a very innovative project. We have talked it up around the country, and people have gotten excited, and they're trying it out. And I think that the idea that this is going to expand across the country is one that's very exciting to all of us. We also are very happy that this is something that is getting the attention of publishers, because one of our sort of ongoing jobs is to try to help publishers understand how powerful libraries are in finding content or books for readers and users. And I think that anything that we can do to show the power of libraries, the power of librarians, in terms of how they find and recommend books to readers is something that we're thrilled to be involved in. So thank you very much, and I guess I'll turn it over to you. I think to the soon-to-be famous committee.
Yes.
Is that right? Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Lucy Terrabor. I work for the Clarendon Hills Public Library doing adult programming and marketing, and I am on the soon-to-be famous Illinois Author Committee, although I'm sort of a newbie to the committee. I was not there in the audience when David planted the seed that became this project. I came on after all the hard work of the first year was over. I figured that was the wise thing to do. But in terms of why we do this, pretty much you just said it all, Dee. We're in the business of bringing great reads to our patrons, and to do that today means to search a lot further and wider than it used to since the advent of ebooks and self-publishing. And what we realized is that there's really no model of how to look at the self-published world, and how do you figure out among all those self-published novels what do we want to bring to our readers? And so the project was an effort to sort of create a framework for how to start doing that. And we think we have done it. And we're thrilled with the quality of writing that we've discovered from doing this. And I have to say at this point that I was very skeptical at first. I was one of those people who was like, self-published? I'm not sure about that. But I read Joanne's book from last year and I really became a believer. I realized that, you know, there's the big publishers have no lock on quality writing. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this group. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our 3 finalist authors, and I'll tell you a little bit about them, and they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves and their writing experiences. And I'm introducing them in alphabetical order, so just in case anybody's getting any ideas. And as I introduce you, if you wouldn't mind coming up and taking one of the seats here, that would be great. The first author I'd like to tell you about is Sharon Kay. Sharon writes award-winning fiction and can never get enough reading time. You'll forgive me if I'm reading their bios because they write it much better than I could make it up. Loves winter and black coffee, but I'm glad winter's over. And is endlessly inspired, I love this, to write kick-ass heroines and the men strong enough to capture their hearts. Sharon lives in the Chicago area with her husband and son. Didn't expect to be writing a book, let alone a series of books, but Wicked Wind and the Solstice series formed in her head one weekend and refused to stay quiet until she put it on paper. Her characters tend to keep her up at night as they banter, fall in love, and slay endless varieties of power-hungry dragons. Sounds fascinating. So I will turn it over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Lucy. I have notes because I will go blank if I don't have something in my hands here. Thank you for that, Lucy. I was asked to say a few words about my writing, my inspiration to become a writer, and I have to honestly say what was in my bio is how it is. The story in the series found me. It formed in my mind over a period of days in fall 2011, and I couldn't sit still until I sat down and started typing. It was like a physical compulsion to start writing and get the words on paper. So that's why I did it, and I just kept going with it. I couldn't stop at one, then the second book was the same, and the third, and so here we are. The series is done, and wow. I find it gratifying to write because of the creative process. I used to be more creative than I was in work that wasn't, and now this is just a way to just be creative. And I also find it gratifying to be able to give readers a place to settle in for a while, an hour a day, just drop into my book and take a break from everything else that's going on in their lives. Because that's what I love to read. And I write the fiction that I love to read, which is paranormal romance. Self-publishing has been a really incredible journey. I feel like there's something to learn every day. I love the freedom of being able to set my prices and decide when I want to have a sale and pick the retailers I want to sell through and pick my own release dates and release 2 books a year if I want to. But with that freedom comes responsibility that we as self-published authors need to be aware of changes that are going on in our industry. And it's fun, but we have to do all the work ourselves. So there's a lot of knowledge as a continual learning curve. I think it's a great honor, and I thank the committee for nominating me, and just to be standing here as a finalist. Yeah, wow. And just another note about libraries. I love libraries. I'm lucky to live in Naperville, where we have 3 branches of our public library. And when my kids were small, I took them to story time at any of the libraries. Whoever was having story time that day, that's where we were. we had our favorite storytellers at the various libraries. We did the crafts. I know I escaped to the library to work on my first book a couple times. And now I volunteer at my local elementary school library, putting books on shelves and whatever they need me to do. So I love libraries. So that's it.
Thank you. Our next finalist is Michael Allen Peck. Michael tells tales big and small. Life isn't always enough for a good story, so he makes up the rest. That's great. He has worked for tvguide.com, has been a restaurant reviewer and a travel writer. He has an awful memory, so he focuses on the written word. He likes to think that over time he's gotten better at it, the writing, not the remembering. That happens to us all. He's good with movie lines, but tends to tweak them over time and prefers his own versions. Funny goes a long way with him, probably further than it should. He grew up outside Philadelphia and has lived in New York, LA, and San Francisco, but he currently resides here in Chicago, and we're glad he's an Illinois author. So, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Soon after I found out that I was a semifinalist, I posted to Facebook that of any contest that I'd entered, this was the most important to me because I love libraries and I love librarians. And I also said that the little kid version of me, who was wandering up to the checkout desk with a copy of Robert the Rose Horse and Richard Scarry's The Great Pie Robbery, would have been so happy to know that this was going to happen to him. And that got me thinking about how did I know that those were the books that I wanted to read when I was 7 years old? It's not like I walked into the library and said, you know, do you have something that's about a working class horse who's allergic to his own product? You know, maybe a nice mystery with a cat and a pig who solves a crime that involves baked goods. I just wanted something good to read. And so I asked the librarian, and a librarian put those books in my hand and launched me on a journey of reading that continued with the guidance of libraries. And where that takes us today is that we have more books than ever with the self-publishing revolution. It's easier to publish than ever. We can read them on paper, we can read them on our Kindle, we can read them on our iPad, on our phone, and the platforms just continue to multiply. And there are people who say that this creates a crisis in literature, where there's just a tsunami of story and we're not going to know what to read, and how are we going to find the good stuff? And I don't believe that that's a crisis. I don't think that you can have too much choice as long as you've got the things that we know about. You have algorithms and you have social media, you have the old dependables of friends to ask and word of mouth. But we also have libraries and librarians who are the professionals at doing this, and using the word professional is also like calling me a professional writer. I mean, librarians do recommending for a living, and writers, if we're lucky, write for a living. But both of us would do it for free. We would do it anyway. If you go on Goodreads and look at some of just the most prolific reviewers and the people who have some of the most influence, and just dig in and check a little bit, a lot of these people are also surprise librarians in real life and not just on Goodreads. It's an enthusiasm that's kind of baked in. They share because it's something that they would do anyway. And that's dedication. It's the kind of dedication that creates the soon-to-be famous contest. And speaking of dedication, I just want to call out, when I found out about the contest, me being me, I couldn't leave myself plenty of time before the deadline to get everything done. It was 7 days before the deadline, and I realized, like, wow, I didn't read the rules closely enough, and I actually have to have a librarian sponsor me. So it's time to start making panicky phone calls, which I'm good at. And I called the Edgewater branch, which was our local branch, and a librarian named Stuart Griner was either lucky or unlucky enough to pick up the phone. Because here it's 7 days to deadline, and I know what it's like. The guy's at work, and he has a plan of what he wants to do that day, and I blew up his plan. Because here I am saying, you know, please, because I wasn't responsible and I only have 7 days, would you read a 91,000 word book on top of everything else you have to do? And he did, and he didn't complain. You know, this is something that he just took on and sponsored me, and it's what got me standing here today. I couldn't have done that without him. And again, that's dedication. And to have the validation of somebody like that means everything to me. And the validation of readers, because we have readers out there who, if they go on Amazon and download a sample, they like your book enough to then pay the money for the whole thing. And it's because if you've done your job, they're dying to find out what happens next. And we are writers, but we are readers too, and librarians are readers too. And you're just dying to find the book that you can't put down, and that when you're doing something else, you're thinking about that character and what happens to them next, and you know, getting back to it. So it's the validation of the reader that counts for everything. And it's the librarians who are going to tell those readers about my book and about Sharon's book and about Jane's book. And you know, when I made the semifinals, a friend of mine said to me, "You've already won." And that's just because librarians have recognized what you're doing, and readers are recognizing what you're doing. And so whichever one of us has their name called as the winner, we've all won. And again, that's the kind of validation that is the whole game to us. So I'll wrap up how I started. Thank you.
Excuse my backside here. Our third finalist is Jane Steen. And reading through her bio and listening to what you two have both said, hello Jane, it occurs to me that the passion, the dedication, as you were saying, is just woven through all three of these, in that you did a lot of other stuff to make it possible for you to write what you really wanted to write, things that you probably weren't really that passionate about. Jane was born in England, lived in Belgium for 16 years, and then moved to the United States in 1997 with her American husband, who I believe is here, and daughters. There we go, shout out there. She's held corporate writing jobs covering areas as diverse as translating technical articles for aerospace magazines and the US government, providing editorial guidance for non-English speaking lawyers, drafting contracts, writing fundraising appeals, and creating marketing copy for realtors. So you see what I'm getting at. Her passion for literature, particularly fiction with 19th century settings, eventually led her to write her own novels. And she is an active member of the Alliance of Independent Authors and the Historical Novel Society. Jane Steen.
Thank you. Michael, you're a hard act to follow. You're going to be great at conferences when you're famous. I'm thrilled to be here. I've actually never entered a contest before because really I didn't ever see one that really meant anything to me. And then a friend texted me a notice about the Soon to Be Famous contest, and it just piqued my interest. I thought, well, librarians are looking for good indie books, and that made all the difference. And right from the start, entering the contest was an advantage because I got a framework to connect with my local library, and Connie is here to support me, which is wonderful. As an author, I'm like all authors, I value librarians as readers because you are very literate people, you're very knowledgeable people, you understand all the latest trends in what's happening in the book world, and best of all, if you like the books, you're going to recommend them to your patrons, which is a real advantage for an indie author. And I also was well aware that you're deluged with self-published books, and you just don't have time to curate them. So initiatives like the Soon to Be Famous project are really important because they provide us this framework, and I'm hoping that in time this sort of thing is going to become a very important way for indie authors to get their books in front of the reading public. My inspirations for writing have come from just about every book I've read through the years. I've had my nose stuck in a book since I was 4 years old, And it was a good thing there were libraries, because I would have had to reread a whole lot more books if I hadn't been able to go to the library, because I always have to read something. At the moment, and of course nowadays there's just so many books, and I usually have about 5 on the go at once. But libraries do provide that discovery. And if you'll forgive me for saying so, guilt-free showrooming, because I've very often bought books after finding them at the library, and I've often bought work by authors that I've been introduced to through the library. And many, I mean, book club books and so forth. It's introduced me to so many authors that I would have never even thought of. They wouldn't have been on my radar. As to my own writing, I was actually named after Jane Eyre, so I was doomed to like Victorian novels from birth. In fact, there was a copy, an abridged version of Jane Eyre on my bookshelf as a child, which I read so many times. And then when I was about 16, I read the full version, and it was like, there's more. The House of Closed Doors was inspired by a photograph in a book that my husband bought me of the Poor Farm, the county Poor Farm, which was in Libertyville. And I thought, what a great setting for a story. And I've always wanted to write a story with some murders in it. So then I came up with this idea of this padded cell being opened and these 2 small bodies falling out. And that kind of started off the story. But I also realized that by setting it in a poor farm, I was able to explore another thing that interested me, which was the way cognitively disabled people were viewed in the 19th century. And my reader reactions to that have been really good. They loved, I have this character called Tess, and people really love her. So that's been very positive for me. For me, self-publishing was a choice for me right from the beginning. And it's really allowed me to pursue the stories that I want to write without worrying about the market, except for the fact that I want to publish, to produce to a high standard. And like many Indies, I'm an entrepreneur, and I love being my own boss. And as Sharon was saying, you know, making my own decisions about when to publish, what to publish. And I have a very strong vision for my writing, which really helps, because there's an awful lot of work involved with very little money at the beginning, believe me. And then I discovered through self-publishing this wonderful community, and Mike Peck and I are both members of the Alliance of Independent Authors. And I'm hoping that Sharon's going to join us pretty soon. I'm always recruiting. They have a campaign called Open Up to Indies, and they're very, very interested in this initiative. So we're going to be reporting. And indie writers support each other, and we inform each other, and we share information and so forth in a way I don't think's ever been done. So I think this is just a wonderful thing. So for me, being here today isn't really about my book, my writing. There's a lot more going on. I can see that Soon to Be Famous sort of being the beginning of libraries being a major factor in the discovery of authors, independent authors, small press authors. It doesn't really matter, because libraries are focused on the culture of reading, which is different from the culture of buying books. Booksellers focus on selling us books. Bestseller lists focus on selling us books. Publicists, they're all focused on selling books, but libraries focus on the culture of reading. And they help people to look for meaningful books if there's something that was published this year or was published 100 years ago. And with the book market is just getting more and more fragmented. And I think libraries, because of this, will have a more important role to play in helping people discover the right books for them. So the Soon to Be Famous Award is really a step in that direction. And thank you so much for holding it. And I'm just thrilled to be a finalist.
I think now we're ready for Donna.
Hi, great to see such a nice group of folks. I'm Donna Fletcher. I have worked on, whoops, what happened? No, I'm supposed to be here. Okay, try this again. I have worked on the committee for the past 2 years. I'm actually not a librarian per se, although I've been a library trustee for a number of years, and I also do a lot of consulting with libraries. At any rate, delighted you're all here. I would like to recognize Joanne, who's going to speak in a moment. I remember when I got her nomination. You may or may not remember, not this January, but a year ago, we had like snow and more snow and more snow right after New Year's Day. And which, interestingly enough, that's when the Tribune actually had a feature article. It was on New Year's Day about this project. And at the time, we had about 40-some nominations. We thought we were doing great. Well, bang, get it in the Tribune. And suddenly, the number of nominations doubled within a few days. And one of them was actually Joanne. And she had gone to her library in Wheaton, right? And the only problem was the woman who was taking care of the nominations was sick. So there was no one else who could help her. But Joanne is actually a librarian as well. School librarian. And so she decided she would just fill out the nomination. And she was absolutely, she didn't hide what she was a librarian. She was self-nominating. That was fine with us. And ultimately, she was the winner last year. And she would like to share, we'd like you to share some of the things that have happened since. Want to come up? Sure. Yeah.
Now, I always come prepared. I don't speak up. Am I okay here? Because I really don't want to hide. It's lovely. All right, so here we are 1 year later. And my hair is finally under control. It's been an issue all year. Now, as I look at these 3 finalists' work, we've got paranormal romance, we've got kind of like urban sci-fi speculative fantasy fiction, we've got historical fiction with a kind of a mystery twist in there. So I truly believe that at this moment, the spirit of my superhero librarian is reanimating itself in India, S.R. Ranganathan, and his words are truly coming true because he said, every reader his book, and every book its reader. He's here in spirit, I know, and he's going to say, that's what I'm talking about. So I was asked to speak about my book sales and what the first soon-to-be famous Illinois project did for them. And yeah, they increased my book sales, both ebook and print. But I don't want to stand up here and be an Excel spreadsheet. I'd really rather talk about what's happened in the year so that these lovely people can maybe anticipate some things. And I've been so nice and so sweet all year. I think it's time to kind of unleash my Arya Stark and stick the pointy end in it. No, okay, I know all the committees now, like looking at each other. Like, did you vet her speech? What is she going to say? No, there will be no disrespect here. It's been a lovely year for me. And it's went by so incredibly fast. I traveled to over 7, 8, 9, 10 counties to libraries all in the metropolitan area. And in fact, there was one time in January when I was in 6 counties in one day in 2 days, like 24 hours, between my home and my work and promoting the book. And it was amazing. Put a lot of miles on the old Honda. So, but it did flash by very quickly. And to me, it's kind of a collection of moments. I mean, all of life is really a collection of moments. And so I think when I think about these moments, I usually have music playing in my head. Music is very important to me in my life. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a David Letterman. I won't go through top 10 too long, but maybe on my blog post you'll see that. All right, so one of the first moments happened not long after I won this award. And I'm calling it the Daryl Hall and John Oates, I can't go for that moment. So I was advised by a writer from New York, a person who's actually here with us this morning, and you know who you are, that as part of a Kickstarter campaign to raise funds for future publishing efforts, because I'm not wealthy and I don't want to spend a lot of money on self-publishing. I didn't spend any money on this book. But anyway, he told me that in order to help raise some funds for various purposes, that I should auction off the naming rights to a character in a said future book. Now, I have to admit, when I heard this, I did burst out laughing. Did I not?
You did.
Because as people who actually have to live with me truly understand, and all apologies to Janet Jackson, but my middle name is Control, and my confirmation name is Freak. So there's just no way that I was going to, on God's green earth, let anyone else name any of my characters. I just can't go for that. But, I mean, I truly understand the idea. And then, this recently happened to me, the Peggy Lee, is that all there is moment. I was asked to Skype with a book club at a library. I did. I kind of got into that whole Skype thing because I could, do it conveniently. They were worried about the weather. So I said, okay. So, and I won't name the library, but we start the Skype session, and the librarian, asked me a few questions. I talk a little bit about the contest, how it won, my book, and then she opens it up to questions from the other book club members. Well, the first woman asked me why I chose the name Wojcik to use in my book. Because she said, my stepfather was named Wojcik, and there were a whole bunch of Wojciks who lived in 43rd Street. And is that the Wojcik you're talking about in your book? I'm like, no, I grew up in an ethnic family. I was looking for ethnic names. That one just popped into my head. And she sounded really upset. I was glad I was Skyping. And then the next comment was, did you have your book proofread? I'm like, yes, by numerous eyes other than my own. Well, we found numerous spelling and grammatical errors. I was like, well, what edition were you reading? Were you reading the ebook? Maybe so. I'm thinking to myself, maybe something happened in the upload. Maybe there were errors. But well, the librarian kind of cut it off soon after that. And later on, I get an apologetic email from the librarian saying that there are certain persons in this book club who cannot resist and hunt for errors in books. And what they mean is like non-standard usage, like when you write dialogue and you say cause instead of because, or kinda instead of kind of, or gonna or ain't. Because I know there are no spelling and grammatical errors in that book, and the reason I know that is because my older daughter read it, and she doesn't let me get away with anything. The only thing she complained about was the font. So I thought, you have nothing better to ask me than about mysterious grammatical usages. So, but there is a French expression called, I think it's pronounced esprit d'escalier. And that means the wit of the staircase, which means you think of a witty retort too late.
Right.
I'm always thinking of the clever comeback 2 hours later. So with these spelling and grammar ladies, what I should have done is I should have said, and remember this, okay, give me the exact page and paragraph and I will fix that just for you. All right, then there was the Lady Gaga moment. Because yes, I have been actually recognized in a variety of places. My local Mariano's Fresh Market, my library, the UPS store. Now, initially, this can be very exciting. And I think I'll have to stop ranting about celebrity authors. No. But while this type of recognition is heady, it does walk the razor's edge because when people recognize you, you realize that they're looking at you, but they're not really just looking at you, they're looking at you. Meaning, like, they're knowing about you, like they're taking note of the fact that you're binge listening to Game of Thrones audiobooks. Another one already? And they're eyeballing the contents of your grocery cart. And you can read their faces like a talking book. Red wine and a bag of Linder's dark chocolate truffle. Must be that time of the month. And yes, sometimes they do want to snap a selfie with you. And of course, the running joke of this whole year is that my hair has never been camera ready. So even though my middle name is Control, it's just not happening usually. So there are at least a few Facebook photos out there that could qualify as hair shaming. And then just recently, just this past Wednesday, 2 days, yes, no, not Tuesday.
Yesterday.
No, it wasn't yesterday, it was the day before. So it must have been Tuesday. I had my Taylor Swift shake it off moment because I got my first 1-star review on Amazon. Have you gotten any 1-star reviews?
I'm afraid to say, because then I'll get one. But no, not yet.
Come on, yeah, on Goodreads. I had never had one before. And I went on Amazon, I was looking because I was checking to see if I got any more reviews. I got one under the heading, waste of my time. And I quote, "This author uses some really wonderful descriptive words, but that is the best thing I can say about this book. The story is just stupid. I just don't care about the main character, Claire. There's nothing about her to like. If you don't get me interested in a main character or even a secondary character, then it's all just a bunch of pretty words. The hater's gonna hate, and I'm just gonna shake. So I've really learned that just like when you go to the beach, the more exposure you have, the more likely you are to get burned. Ooh, pass me the ointment. But then there's this moment, which happened in the fall. It was at the Chicago Ridge Library, and it was before a very small audience. I think maybe there was 5 people there, which was fine with me. I'm thrilled when one person shows up. 41, 25, doesn't matter. And, I went through my presentation, and I was having my audience question, Q&A. And a woman says to me that she had been reading a passage of my book, and she loved my book. It made her laugh, it made her cry. And she's telling me about this passage in my book that made her think of her grandmother's house, and in particular, the bathroom in her grandmother's house, and the black and white tile on the floor in the bathroom of her grandmother's house. And as she's telling me this story, she started to cry. And I can't tell you how moving that was to me. To know that I had made that connection with her, and that I had moved, my writing had moved her that much. It was just an incredible experience for me. So I guess those descriptive words really helped. You, 1-star. So anyway, that was fame enough for me. I'd have to tell you that. So of all of these moments, I think that is the one that I would wish for all 3 of you to have, that connection with your reader and really feeling that you moved your reader. So good luck to you all. Here.
Thanks, Joanne. Okay, next, David, who I'm sorry, I can never pronounce,
Ginger Mori.
Jerry Moore, yes, will be speaking. he was really the inspiration for this whole project back in 2013 when he was at the American Library Association conference, which just happened to be here in McCormick Place. And that's when he talked about self-publishing and how libraries could have a big effect on it. And that was really the seed of the programs that you're hearing about. So let me tell you a little bit about David. He is 20 years, he was in consumer marketing with companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola, DoubleClick. He now is an adjunct professor at NYU, New York University. He's an adjunct assistant professor for marketing. And he is also a columnist for Forbes and Library Journal, two very respected publications, and also contributes to Publishers Weekly. He's also an author of both traditionally published books. One is Accidental Branding, correct? And then he also has two indie titles, Operator's one and Binder is the other, correct? At any rate, he has been a great inspiration. I don't think we ever would have done this if he hadn't made that presentation at ALA in 2013. So come on up, David.
So between planting germs and giving people their overcomable moments, I want to say that anybody who knows me knows that I hate the morning. And anything that I do before 9 o'clock in the morning has got to be really important. And I woke up at 3 a.m. this morning to come here. And after we're done, I'm going back to New York. So I feel very, very passionately about what you're doing. And I can tell you from a lot of long experience that strategy is nothing. Ideas are nothing. It's when people actually take them and do something with them that they become real, just like writers writing books. So a little bit of background. I got into this for two reasons. One is that as an author, I became frustrated when my boutique high-end literary agency experienced a meltdown in between my first nonfiction book and my first fiction novel, which they'd accepted. And then I went to work with another agency that seemed really excited about the fiction book, and then the head of that agency got a divorce. And without actually being rejected, I spent 2 years in limbo with writing. And around that time, I realized I had been reading self-published books without knowing it, and heard something about this movement that was starting. And I wrote an article in Forbes about this called Publishing is Broken, that eventually about 200,000 people read. And as a result of that, a tiny little publisher whose house had 14 titles came to me and said, there's something really strange going on with libraries. We just had one of our titles, a young adult title that has a Indian soccer playing female heroine on the Today Show. And we had the great marketing idea of taking this book and donating a free electronic copy to every library in America. And so we went to the company that we found out controls 93% of the libraries in America, their electronic collections, and I won't name that company here. And they said, we can't help you. We're not interested because you're too small. And that seems wrong. And so I thought, well, that is interesting. And right that week, actually, Maureen Sullivan, the then president of the American Library Association, wrote an open letter to publishers saying, why are we paying $84 for a book that an ordinary consumer can buy for $9.99? Why does that make sense? And do you not recognize what libraries do for publishers? And so I thought, there's something here. I should really learn more about this. And I started to research, and my idea in my head was that I was going to write a brief little 500-word essay for Forbes on this issue, which grew into 2 articles totaling 16,000 words, which Hugh Howey told me was actually longer than the book Wool that made him famous, which was 12 years. But along the way, I discovered some interesting things, and I became convinced that actually the only reason we're reading at all is because of libraries. Because if you think about it, when I'm holding in my hand an iPad, Facebook, Candy Crush, I can see you people out there, Netflix, all of these things are tremendously engaging and tremendously distracting. And believe it or not, in 1450, when movable type, and I've been told by my Chinese students at NYU to mention that it was not the invention of movable type that Gutenberg is known for, it was the invention of metal and wooden letters in movable type, because movable type came from China. But at that time, people were doing a lot of different things. When reading started, you want to know what anybody who saw my talk in 2013 knows, but you want to know what the #1 public activity, public diversion in the UK was? Public executions. Okay, so that was the best one that you could have. And the fact that all of those things that people were doing 500 years ago, they're not doing now, not very many of them anyway. So the fact that reading is here has to do with something, and it probably has to do with the fact that we send our kids to the library, that we read to them every night because we're reminded to by our librarians, that we have a whole cycle, a whole ecosystem of reading that grows up with us around the library. And we shouldn't take this for granted. And I believed, and I still believe strongly, that libraries are at an important moment. In 1950, there were 11,000 books published. The average library could buy 14,000 of them, meaning it was just a matter of deciding what you wanted multiple copies of and what you didn't need at all for your collection. This last year, there were over 1 million books published, equally divided between traditionally published and indie published books. So that creates an entirely different landscape. And when I, at ALA 2 years ago, when I said libraries need to curate this huge new landscape of books, I didn't actually think anybody was going to listen. And I had barely walked out of the room and literally left the building when I got a message on Twitter saying we should do something about this. And I started a conversation that helped lead to this. But I did no work. I was just like, yeah, this is a good idea. You should definitely do this. And all the hard work was done by the librarians in this room and in these communities. And I think it's amazing that what started here has become now a national movement and is moving quickly to other states. What I want to do next is to actually, since I'm a marketer at heart, I want to market these 3 books before I tell you or we find out together who the winner is. And I'm going to read just a couple of short paragraphs from each. But before I do that, I want to tell you that after we find out about that and after we hear from the winner, that I'm going to come back and I'm going to tell you about what I think is the next stage of marketing and of showing the value of libraries, which is a test that we're working on now in Colorado, and that we're going to be doing in these same libraries, many of them, this summer with publishers and with indie authors to build the value of the library. So, having said that, let me read from Sharon Kay's book. And again, I'll give you a few short paragraphs, just enough to draw some blood. I'm teaching her everything I know, Brooke said, as the men headed into the great room. Alone in the kitchen, the sisters started from scratch with the pancake recipe. As she cracked eggs, Brooke asked, "Does Torth have vampires?" Nicole frowned. "We don't run into any when we were there. Why?" "I had the weirdest dream last night." Then again, things that used to seem weird were becoming the new normal. "About a vampire?" "I guess. She had fangs, red eyes, and blonde hair." Nicole wiped her flour-coated fingers on a paper towel. "If I've learned anything in the last month, it's that things can only get weirder. We can ask the guys about it." Brooke nodded as they assembled the ingredients, making a double batch and popped the baking dishes into the ovens. 30 minutes later, Nicole remarked, I see 5 hungry demons hanging around out there. So that makes you wonder, doesn't it? Okay, so now let's try a couple paragraphs from The Commons by Michael Allen Peck. The knee was a whisper, not a scream, thanks to the pinkies. The Minute Clinic doctor who prescribed the painkiller at the company's Wednesday Wellness Wing told Annie that the pink capsules were formulated for subtle benefit. She'd be sharp, her pain dull. They did make the throb tolerable, but Annie was most definitely not sharp. She focused well enough to be competent. Excellence was out of the range. It didn't help that the metrics team was burst tasking again, launching fusillades of data requests into the project management queue. Numbers, now. If Andy had to write queries in the bathroom in order to turn them around faster, that was just Ginchy with the Shea metrics. In fact, if she was dumb enough to mention the idea to them, they'd make it a stretch goal. And you still have no idea what this book is about. And now, from The House of Closed Doors by Jane Steen. My stepfather was not particularly fond of me to begin with, and now that he'd found out about the baby, he was foaming at the mouth. I mean that literally. One of Hiram Jackson's less attractive characteristics was the liberal spray of spittle that doused the room whenever he got agitated about his subject. He was in full flow now, in both the verbal and salivary sense, and a small crest of foam gathered in the corners of his thin lips as he paced, hands clasped behind his back and chin jutting. His face glowed a dull, mottled red, and the stretching of skin occasioned by his outrage caused his eyebrows, small goatee, and side whiskers to bristle outward like outcrops of winter trees on a piebald landscape. The charm of which he was famed had evaporated, and I found myself wondering in a detached manner what my mother had been thinking when she decided to end her long widowhood by marrying this man. Who is the father? And I think that'll get you on. I have to say that between last year and this, I have seen a change in the finalists. There was great writing last year. There is great writing this year, but the character of the authors here is somewhat different. The authors last year were primarily writing from passion. That's still true, but the authors this year are, I would say, very professional about the way that they're going about it. The fact that they're clearly all marketing their own works, that they're professionally networked, that they're thinking of their writing as a career, and they're thinking about how to pursue it. This actually parallels what's going on in the indie movement now too. And I think I really feel increasingly now that this distinction that we've maintained between traditionally published and indie books is blurring and will disappear. Just the way now, if you look at blogs, many of them are written by traditional journalists, many of them are not. You look at the quality of what you're reading to determine its worth, rather than the title of who's presenting it to you. And I think that we're going to see the same thing too, which is why forums like Soon to Be Famous are so important, because you're doing the important work of curating. Okay, having said that, and if this works, let's see. The winner of the Soon to Be Famous Illinois Author Contest. There's another question mark there. I think the winner's in between the two questions.
So now I have to come up with something to say. And the first thing I'm thinking is that when David started to pull that up, I saw the bottom of it, and I thought, well, I don't look like a question mark. And this is wonderfully heavy. So I have notes in case this happened, which is just looks like a strange thing to do, except that I knew that what's happening now would be happening, which is my brain, the synapses are just kind of misfiring and short-circuiting all over the place, and so I needed to give myself something to say. I think you've heard plenty from me already, and so since there's no orchestra here to play me off, I'll give you that kind of a hint. Again, I will keep it rather brief. I want to congratulate Sharon and Jane for the success of their work and for being here today as well. And I also wanted to thank my wife Renee, who is a professional editor, and then also actually took on the not fun challenge of editing my book and having to deal with me every other day, going, "How far are you? What do you think?" And my mom, who came up from Jacksonville, Florida. So I would thank Southwest Airlines as well, except they made her pay for the ticket. And then I spy some colleagues in the back from the Kellogg School of Management who came all the way down from Evanston. And so I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys doing that and coming down. But really, I want to thank the librarians who put in all this work to create this. And I mean everything that I said before in terms of just the passion that takes and the dedication that takes, and David Vinjamori for providing the inspiration that created the soon-to-be famous Illinois Author Project. I guess the funny part of it is now that presents an intimidating challenge where if I'm not famous, at the end of the year, I'm in big trouble. But, thank you, and again, I can't express enough gratitude. This means more than you know, so thank you very, very much.
Hi, I'm Denise Raleigh from the Gail Borden Public Library District. I also work with ILA and lots of committees. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank these authors for coming and for writing. I want to thank the libraries in Illinois who support this project and those who will start to support this project. We also have a book coming out later this fall about making it easy. Again, the difference between last year and this year have been tremendously different because of the hard work of many of these committee members. So thank you again to the committee members for Soon to Be Famous. And for those in the room, enjoy, have something to eat. And David will be talking about his next project, the Discovery Project, in about 15 minutes. So we know we're running a little bit behind, but wasn't this wonderful to hear from these authors and for everything else? And I got to tell you, this was a very close contest. So we have these tremendously talented writers, and from last year, many of the writers, not just the winner, received great press and great opportunities. So we want to thank the indie authors, we want to thank the libraries, and we want to thank all of you for coming. And please have something to eat and come back in 15 minutes and watch David talk about the Discovery Project that's going to happen, I think, throughout the United States this summer. Thank you very much. Can we get some food?
Should I still keep recording? Or?
Yeah, do whatever you want to do. Can I go turn after?
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
David? Discovery Project.
Yes.
Good work, any viewers? Good. Well, Jeff is got up on the computer, if you want to just type them in.
Yeah, I'll ask him what he's
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Cindy, so much.
I told him to come over here as soon as he had a chance, but.
I think he's standing.
We thought it was the first. Until they found out that my ride home.
Congratulations, Mom.
That was great reaction.
That was. I couldn't believe Richard Sierra was great. Did you call that? I talked to a nurse. Why not? I said, I watched it. Yeah.
Conversation going.
I know.
I think last year they kept it
I know, it's. Yeah, either you can hardly read the sign or you can't.
Well, not like on camera anyway, but. I'm just thinking, I just wanted a couple to show people. I know. I think it's really exciting. It is every day. Anyway.
I've rewritten it. It's not like, it's now, where I'm ready, you know, I just have to finalize, I'm actually ready to start it. No, I have no, it's I know it's right. It's good. Even the, like, like a god. Just like, you know, but I have to. Okay, so you're just 5 years. Oh, no, it is. I was thinking, and I suggested something crazy.
All right, here we go. All right, thanks for everyone for sticking around. Hello, David's going to speak about his next project, the Discovery Project, that's going to happen across the country, not just in the Rails libraries, but without further ado, this is David Montgomery, and he's going to be speaking about the Discovery Project that is kind of a sister project to the soon-to-be famous Illinois author. David, thank you.
So I want to talk to you for a second about what's next. And I think that if you were paying attention earlier and you heard all of these authors talk, one of the things that's common to authors these days is that we have to be more than writers. We actually have to be entrepreneurs. Now, my traditionally published book is about entrepreneurs. And from the earliest days of my marketing career, I learned that the first thing you need to know about an entrepreneur is somebody who has taken all their time to get 5 jobs they don't know anything about, right? So when you're an entrepreneur, you know about the thing that you set out to do, whether that's being a bookkeeper or a silk screener or a photographer or an author. What you don't know about necessarily is marketing, bookkeeping, inventory control, sales, publicity. These are all the other jobs that you gain. Now, there was a day, probably in the 50s, certainly long before I was writing, when any author had access to many of these things as part of being traditionally published, being published by a large or a small publishing house. And some of these things still happen. When I wrote a book for a publishing house, I was assigned an editor, I was assigned a publicist, and then I took my 5-figure advance and spent it all on a professional PR agency because that was the only possible way to make sure that I sold more than 100 books. And what's happened today, if you really look at it, what's happened is that most publishers have essentially become venture capital houses. They try to pick people they think can be successful marketing their own books and make an investment in them. And they make a few big investments, but actually many, many more small investments. So when the thing that has distressed me over the last couple of years is the friction between traditionally published and self-published authors, because they're really more alike than anything else. Because the reality is, if you're signed by HarperCollins and you're not one of their A authors, you're very likely to have a very small number of resources devoted towards you. And that means that you have to become expert at publicity. You have to become expert at marketing. You might actually want to hire a developmental editor to look at your work before it goes to the copy editor that is the only thing in your budget, in the budget for your book. These things are all true. When I was edited by my publishing house, I had a pretty good experience, but it didn't compare to the experience I had when I got to look at samples of freelance editing from 15 different editors, all of whom had experience with big publishing houses, and pick the one that matched my style exactly. And getting edited by this woman was like spending a day in the sauna. You know, it was like a real fantastic experience because it matched my style. But all of these jobs means that writers are something different. Authors are something different today than they once were. Where very few of us sit behind these walled gardens and merely think about words and think about stories and structure and, you know, all the great things that we can do with a book. We spend 2/3 of our time thinking about all the things that come after and all the things that have to come before. So having said that, it suggests that there's something fundamentally broken in the way that books are marketed, and I think this is true. What we know is that publishers tend to do something that in the rest of consumer marketing is considered impossible. They try to break even on new products. So if you're not a franchise author who has a long track record, who sells 100,000 plus books every time you release a new title, then to get any investment, you have to basically show that you can earn out your advance. And that's a very difficult thing to do. Most books do not do that. So essentially the industry has set people up for failure. Now, there are reasons for that. Superstores actually were the earliest contributor. Any of you remember Walden Books?
Yep.
So there was this little place in the mall, remember malls? That you would go into. It was like between Radio Shack and GNC, and about the same size as both of those. And it would have, you know, books sort of packed in there. And, you know, it was very democratic in the sense that there was only a handful of places to actually display anything, and the rest of the bookstore was sort of, you know, like inventory. And when Borders opened the first Superstore, they actually dramatically expanded the place that you could feature authors. And this created a real dilemma for publishers, because suddenly they, instead of having 1 or 2 or 3 well-known authors who could be featured, they had to have a huge number. They had to have 5 or 6 or 7 in every subcategory that they were dealing with. And that meant that instead of being fairly democratic about every new author that they're signed, maybe there's still an elite tier of authors, but beyond that, everybody gets some publicity, some marketing, we see how they break out. They had to make choices. So what they did is they made a few bets every year, and they put money behind them, and everybody else started to get a little bit less and less and less than they had gotten. So by the time you came to the 2000s, but when the Rocketbook was, the first e-reader was launched, and then Sony came in with the Sony Reader, and then importantly, Amazon launched the Kindle and created this whole ecosystem for self-publishing. Authors were actually looking differently than they had looked before. Most of them were pretty savvy marketers. The ones who were actually making a living at it, and there weren't a huge number, but the ones who were, knew what to do to get their books to move off the shelves, in addition to what to do to get them onto the shelf to begin with. And because of that, the marketing, the actual marketing skill, and this is probably a controversial viewpoint in New York, but my perspective is that the marketing skill in the industry has moved from the big houses into actually the hands of a lot of these authors. Look at, I was in Hachette 2 weeks ago, and there's one author who has more influence in that entire building than anybody else probably in the whole city, who's James Patterson. Now, what's James Patterson's background? He was an advertising executive, right? James Patterson taught the company how to market. He was the first one to do advertising on TV for books. And so you have this whole generation of really tremendously experienced authors who have taken marketing into their own hands. That's great, except that not every great writer is a great marketer and a great inventory person and always knows to follow up to emails and has an instinctive sense of the people who are going to read their book and pass it along. And those are all difficult things. So wouldn't it be nice if there were places and ways that publishers could more efficiently expose new authors who are not going to be immediately commercially viable, and that's a code word for saying light bondage, extreme following of the trend that happens to be very popular in a given year, right? Because look at, we talk about, publishing people always talk about the brilliant book that they brought to market, but what are they actually spending time on? They're spending time on the book that sells 50 million copies. And more likely, they're not the publishing house that has that book. And so what they're spending time on is the 20 clones of the book that sold 50 million copies. And you may love The Hunger Games, but did you love the next 3 series that did that same concept in a slightly different way, but not as well, right? So this is the problem. The problem is that if you're going to only make a few bets and you're only going to follow winners, you can't do much for just great writers. So oddly enough, there is a place in America that gets, say, 1.5 billion visits a year. By the way, that's a whole order of magnitude greater than the number of visits to any chain or all of the chains together of bookstores. That is an expert in books, and I'm with all of you now. It's libraries, right? It turns out that if you go back in history, even I think is not as far back as 30 years, publishers had a more intimate relationship with libraries and a much less adversarial relationship. And the idea of sending free books to libraries, sending developmental authors to libraries, saying, hey, this is not very commercial at the moment. This author needs 10 or 20,000 devoted readers to be a good prospect. But you know what? We will put them in the bookstore, but focus on developing a readership through the library. We'll make an investment, a 5-year investment, a 3-book investment in this author to develop the readership, and then that person will be commercially viable. Guess what? That's how we actually develop every other brand that you use today. Whatever you brush your teeth with, whatever you put in your hair, whatever you wore this morning, all those brands were developed over years with an investment, and something that publishers haven't been consistently doing. So the idea, obviously, that I've had for a long time, or a relatively long time since I got into this space, was that somehow publishers ought to be working with libraries instead of having very public divisive feuds with them about why they should be justified in overcharging them for books, right? That would be a better thing. But it's been difficult to figure out exactly what to do about that. And this last year, I was lucky in reforming a connection with a guy who I'd interviewed before for Forbes, who does custom data for the publishing industry. And we got together to talk about some other random stuff. And he said, so what have you been doing the last couple of years? And I said, well, it's funny because I teach and I write books. And I actually make money by doing training, but I've been spending a huge amount of my time on none of those. I've been going around to libraries trying to convince them to stop focusing on bestsellers and to think about how they can more systematically develop new authors. And he said, oh, that's really funny because I was just at, and he named a big 5 publisher, talking about, and he named a fairly big author. And they said that they wanted to do a library campaign for this guy, and they have no idea what to do. And I said, well, that's really funny, because I know exactly what they could do. And it feels like we're, looking at the same question from 2 different sides. So, so we got to talking, and we decided that what we actually wanted to do was to see if we could objectively test the proposition that libraries can build author brands. Now, branding to some of you may be sort of a bad word, but I'm using it in a very specific way. So if any of you like, does anybody here like cooking? How many of you have heard of a term called mise en place? So there's this professor that I share a room with at NYU, and when I say that, I mean that they so tightly schedule our classes that whoever's teaching before you, you almost sort of run into them. Their students are in the classroom, yours are in the classroom. And so I end up chatting with him for a minute or two at the end of each class. And this last year, he told me about a special that he had done for NPR on mise en place. And so I looked it up, and I was so taken with the way that he described this that I actually did a session on it in my product and brand management course, because it's a simple thing that chefs do, which is simply that they prepare everything in advance. They get a plan. They have a list of things that they're going to do. They do all of the chopping and preparation and measuring before they start to cook. They keep their space clean, and they know how they're going to go about their entire day before they start. But in a larger sense, it's an attitude towards life. It's a way of approaching their daily lives. Chefs have a very big problem when they go to the doctor's office. Why do they have a problem when they go to the doctor's office? How many of you have gone to a doctor's office and seen a doctor in the same hour that you entered the office? So doctor's office, now there's reasons for this, but doctor's offices chronically run behind. But chefs do not run behind. Why? Because you may wait an hour in the doctor's office. You are not going to wait an hour for your food at a restaurant. So they actually have to figure out how to get things on time. And mise en place is that. Mise en place says, if things get messy and I'm getting behind, I don't actually try to go faster. I stop, I clean up, and I clean my mind, and then I start again. Branding is like that. Branding is not marketing. Branding is not advertising. Branding is not about getting people who don't know you to buy your stuff or forcing on them. Branding is actually about solving a problem, solving it in a unique way, and then finding the people that can benefit from your solution. Okay? And what that means is that whoever you are and whatever you're doing, you have to identify what you're adding to the world. So great branding is not just about taking something, taking a pig and putting lipstick on it. It's about actually figuring out whether your audience is kosher or not. Not with the pig. That was my point. So you, when we talk about libraries and publishers and branding, we really want to develop author brands. We want authors to understand what they're great at and why exactly they attract people. Because we know, I now know from having my partner in the publishing industry that when a reader identifies an author as one of his favorites, that he or she is 5 times more likely to buy the book of that author than any other book. That they'll pay a premium of about $4 for that book. There's a huge financial incentive to want people to be a favorite. Not just, oh, it's okay, I'm aware of that author, sure, I'd read it. But this is one of my favorite authors. That's what we're striving for. And for authors to understand, well, what is it that I'm doing that's connecting to people and being able to do that, whether that's literally writing a series or whether it just has to do with an approach to writing or a way of revealing insights. Now, for publishers and for libraries, the question is, how do we find a way to develop these brands? And that's tricky because the places that publishers used to do it are fast disappearing. Borders is gone. Okay, that was almost 2,000 stores gone. Barnes & Noble made over a quarter of their sales from toys in the last fiscal period. So their solution to the difficulty that they're having with Amazon has been to merchandise toys. And that all comes at the expense of books and of authors. Amazon is doing what they're doing very well, but even though I honestly believe that the people, there love books, they're commoditizing books because it's the smartest thing for them to do to deal with their antagonistic relationship with publishers, okay? And the problem with Amazon is that although their inventory may be virtually unlimited, their storefront is about the size of your screen. Actually, it's exactly the size of your screen, which means that you can't browse the same way that you browse in a physical space. Now, have any of you noticed that when you go into a Home Depot or a Target or a Walmart that you mysteriously have trouble getting a connection on your phone that was working outside in the parking lot just a moment ago? Right?
Or not so mysteriously.
Not so mysteriously, right? It's illegal. The FCC doesn't allow this, but there is widely believed to be fairly widespread jamming of signals. Now, why are those stores doing that?
Price check Amazon.
Price check, right? Because they don't want you to price check. There's a word for that. It's called showrooming. So they are actually going to these stores and they're looking at the physical price of something, and then they're buying it online, which makes those stores expensive showrooms. What's interesting is that there's a second reason that people do that. That's the number 2 reason beyond I can find a better price online. And the reason is I need to see something and feel it before I buy it. And that's an incredibly important part of the experience of purchasing for people. The problem for publishers is that space is gone. It's going fast. Go into an indie bookstore. They're incredibly good at selling books, but they don't do a lot of display because they don't have a lot of space. So they've picked the 20 or 30 books that they're going to be involved with, and they're moving them very efficiently, and they're guiding individual people towards books, but publishers can't have any influence on what's going on there because those people know their audiences, they know what they read, and they have to pick in their own way. So this is all a long way of coming to the question of what could we do with libraries that would both benefit publishers commercially and therefore change the relationship, the antagonistic relationship that they have right now with libraries. And so what we're looking at doing is to see if we actually give space to publishers in a library to display books, but instead of doing it haphazardly as they do now, so you get Gail Borden, I know you can call Random House and they'll send you some books, and this is true in libraries around the country. What if instead we knew that out of 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet, 10 square feet was going to be the same book in the same relative location all around the country at the same time, right? Because we know that there's a critical mass effect with any consumer product. There's a critical mass. And if we can get over that critical mass, we can actually take something from being a 1,000 sale book or a 5,000 sale book or a 10,000 sale book to the next level. So the idea that we're going to test is library approved but publisher controlled display of books in libraries around the country. And this will involve both traditionally published and indie authors. We started this effort in the Anythink library system in in Adams County, Colorado. And we're working with Hachette there. We've put 2 titles into 2 different branches there. We did very deep displays that are the kind that, unless you have an enormous library, would be difficult to do, and they'd be impossible to do for anything but a bestseller. But these books, in spite of the fact that one of them is by James Patterson, they're not bestsellers. One of them is middle grade, James Patterson. The other is an author called Michael Robotham, who's a thriller author and who's a mid-list author. And what's been interesting is that, first of all, in these two different branches, we've actually lent out a lot of books. In a 4-week period with 75 books, we lent out about 140 copies of each book. So we did more than one circ in that time. The second thing is that with Patterson, it was difficult to know what happened. This is only one branch, and he had a lot of activity going on with his middle grade books at the same time, so there was no readable effect. But with the middle grade, with the mid-list author, Robotham, we actually saw a statistically significant increase in his Nielsen share in that market. So his book sales for his new book, which came out during the test, not by coincidence, actually increased dramatically. We also had 8% of the people who borrowed the book go online to we created a URL to put a review up on, and we had 8% of the readers go and actually write a review, which is, I mean, anybody who knows their own Amazon numbers, I think I figured that for every 1,000 readers, I got like about 1 review on Amazon. So this is, that's 0.1%. So this is an incredible rate of response. And it just shows that that library readers, particularly when they're aware that there's something going on and that this is the opportunity for them to support their library as publishers are supporting the library, they see the opportunity. The books are all donated by the publishers, and they're the libraries to keep afterwards. So the benefit for the library is attention, a whole bunch of lens, some excitement, a lot of comments by patrons, but also some interest. Now, what we're hoping to do, we don't know what's going to happen this summer yet. We have a meeting with Hachette next week. We're hoping that they will be sort of the anchor sponsor for a national test this summer. We have somewhere near 100 branches in the rail system and around Illinois, in Colorado, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in King County, in outside of Seattle, in Washington State, and in Multnomah County in Oregon, including Portland. So those are, as you know, those are some premier library districts around the country and some really leading edge thinkers in terms of libraries. And we're hoping that they're going to sponsor it, but if not, we have, some of you may have seen, I wrote an article in Publishers Weekly last week called The Case for Libraries, which is about basically what I'm talking about now. And we're actually sponsoring a meeting at Random House on April 28th. That will, where I'll do a presentation explaining why publishers need to actually try to get libraries to work with them to develop new authors and why that's so important to publishing and to reading in the long term. And at that meeting, I'll have a panel there, which is going to consist of Brian Bannon here, from the head of Chicago Public, Tony Marks, who's the head of the New York Public Library, Bailey Ohika, who's the head of Multnomah County, and Pam Stanley and Smith from Anythink, as well as the president of Writers House. So that'll be a very high profile forum, and that's all going to be publishing people. And so hopefully also coming out of that, we'll have additional people interested in taking part in this test. Our plan as of today is to try to run this in July. We know we have to get the books out to the libraries about a month earlier. So we're now really up against the time frame to see if we can get people signed on for the summer. But we've had a great experience so far with Hachette, and we're excited about doing this because we are actually going to measure it in a whole bunch of ways beyond looking just at the Nielsen sales and the DMAs for these books. We're going to be looking at incremental reviews. We're doing a whole social panel to look at search results, at other social metrics, at Twitter, at all the different websites. We're doing some custom research around it. And libraries themselves are going to be recording information about the number of lens and the movement of these books. One thing I didn't say earlier, which I thought was fascinating, is that, remember, in this test, there was a book by the #1 author in the world right now, although one of his lesser developed series. And then there was a book by a relatively unknown author. The book by the relatively unknown author had more lens over that period by 3 books. So the great thing is that people trust libraries. If you put something up in your library and you're comfortable with it, then people will be interested in it. There's a program in Tulsa called Wowberry, and it's a simple data analytics program. What they do is they identify books that have not had any copies lent out over a certain period, and they systematically put those into an email campaign. Okay, so for each one of those books that goes in email, there's usually between like 4 and 8 copies in the system. I think they have 15 branches in their system. So there's like 4 and 8, somewhere between 4 and 8 copies, and on every single one of them, they have not been lent out recently, and they generate excess holds. So what does it say? It says that your collection development people know what they're doing. If they bought a book, the chances are it's worth reading for someone. And that if you actually just do the job of letting people know, that they will read it. They'll take it out and they'll engage with it. Librarians hold this enormous public trust, and publishers hold the key to all of these great authors, as well as this community of indie authors that Soon to Be Famous has developed. And I really see these 2 places working together. My vision for this is that if we're able to do this successfully and continue it, that an indie author would never have to pay to do this program, that they could just donate books and have them featured around the country, and that publishers would pay for the mechanics of getting this done and the ability to develop some of their bigger authors. So that's what I wanted to let you know. It's still a work in progress. We'll know more in the next few weeks, but we're very much hoping that we can turn this into something this summer. By the way, for any librarians who are watching, I will be back here in Chicagoland on July 9th with Library Journal. I'm doing a full-day workshop on, this is the first time actually my day job, which for the last 10 years has been as a corporate marketing trainer. So I teach American Express and Starwood Hotels and the Army and the Navy and the Commerce Department about brand marketing. So I'm doing a workshop here with Library Journal on merchandising. And sort of the nuts and bolts of making some of these practices work, and that should be fun. Novelist is sponsoring it, and they've got a librarian actually who's an expert at this as well, who's going to be doing some of this with me. So that should be fun. Please join us. But hopefully by then we can also be looking around and seeing what's going on in your libraries with this program. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer anything if anything popped up to mind. Okay, great, thank you.